There is a god at the center of these stories, and before any of it begins, he already knows exactly how it ends. He knows the winter that will not break, the wolf that will swallow the sun, and the day the sky splits, and a beast larger than the world opens its jaws to kill him. And knowing all of it, he builds the world anyway, arms it, fills a hall with the honored dead, and waits. This is the entire story of that world, from the murder of the first giant, whose corpse became the mountains and the sea, to the death of the gods on a burning plain, to the green earth that rises quietly after the fire. All of it the way the old texts actually tell it. Because scholars have long noticed the strangest thing about how the Norse imagined their gods. Odin spends the whole span of the myths not gathering power, but gathering knowledge of his own defeat. This is the only creation story ever told where the god who made the world holds the last page first and marches toward it clear-eyed. So let us go back, before the mountains, before the sea, before the gods had names to lose. In the beginning, the Voluspa tells us, there was no beginning to see, no sand, no sea, no cool waves breaking on any shore. There was no earth below, and no heaven arching above, only Ginnungagap, the great yawning void, and grass nowhere. As the Norse cosmos was imagined, this emptiness was not truly empty. It was flanked. To the south lay Muspelheim, a realm of pure fire, scorching and bright, so hot that none but its own could endure it. To the north lay Niflheim, a world of ice and freezing mist and ancient dark, and where the searing air of the fire world drifted north and met the rime of the ice world, the ice began to thaw. From that melting, the prose Edda records, something stirred to life in the dripping void. Ymir, the first being, the eldest of the frost giants, formed from the meeting of fire and ice in the middle of nothing, and beside him, from those same salt-rimed blocks of thawing ice, came a great cow, Audumla. She licked the salty ice for her nourishment, and where she licked, on the first day the hair of a man appeared, and on the second a head, and on the third an entire god stepped free of the frost, Buri, the ancestor of Odin himself. Hold on that image, because it tells you a great deal about how the Norse understood their own origins. There is no word spoken over the waters here, no design, no loving hand shaping a garden. Life simply melts into being at the boundary of extremes, fire against ice, in a void that did not care whether it came at all. The first god is licked out of a block of ice by a cow. The universe of the North does not begin with a plan. It begins with an accident of temperature. And notice, too, that the giant and the gods come from the same thaw. Ymir the frost giant and Buri the ancestor of the gods are not opposites summoned from opposing worlds. They are both children of the same dripping ice, cousins born of the identical accident. The line that runs down from Buri to Bor, and from Bor to Odin and his brothers, is a giant's line by blood, which makes what comes next not the clean triumph of light over dark, but something far more unsettling, a killing within a family, and it turns, almost immediately, to violence. For Buri's line and Ymir's line could not share the same emptiness. Odin and his brothers, the sons of Bor, they rose against the ancient giant, and they killed him. And here the Norse imagination does something no other creation myth quite dares. It does not discard the body. It builds with it. From Ymir's flesh, the gods made the earth. From his blood, and there was a flood of it. They made the seas and the lakes, and they ringed the world in it, an ocean encircling the new land. From his unyielding bones they raised the mountains. From his teeth and the splinters of his shattered jaw, they scattered the stones and the gravel. From his hair grew the trees, and they took his enormous skull and lifted it over the world to become the vault of the sky itself, fixed at its four corners. Last, the prose Edda records, they flung his brains into the air above, and those became the clouds, so that even now, in the myth's own telling, the weather passing overhead is the mind of a murdered giant. The poetic Edda tells it the same way, in words older than Snorri's. Of Ymir's flesh, the earth was shaped, and of his blood, the swelling sea. Two separate texts, centuries apart, reaching for the same terrible picture, a world that is, quite literally, a dead thing given the shape of a living one. Sit with what that means, because the old poets clearly did. This is a cosmos where death is not the enemy that arrives at the end. Death is the material. It is the ground you stand on, and the water you drink, and the stone of each mountain, and the vault of sky over your head. Scholars have read this creation from a corpse as the founding key to Norse myth, that a world built from a killing carries its own finitude in its bones, that whatever was raised from Ymir's body inherits the one certain fact about a body, which is that it does not last. The gods knew this. That is the part the myths never let you forget. They did not build in ignorance and get ambushed by the end. In the way the North told it, Odin would give an eye and hang himself for 9 nights on the world tree and stalk the halls of the dead, all of it to see what was coming. And what he saw was that it comes for him. The wolf, the winter, the burning. It was never a question of whether, only of when. This is what the scholars mean when they call the Norse worldview one of doomed courage rather than despair. That the gods of the North are perhaps the only gods in any of the great mythologies who go on building and fighting and laughing while holding perfect foreknowledge of their own defeat. Other traditions promise their gods eternity or hide the ending in shadow. This one does neither. It hands its gods the last page first, and then asks what a being does with the days remaining when it already knows the count. That question, more than any monster or any battle, is the true engine of the saga ahead. And so the first world stood, green and living, raised on a foundation of murder, roofed with a giant skull, watched over by gods who already knew it would fall. They gave it a tree to hold it together. They gave it a wall to keep the giants out. They gave it at its very heart a place for people. But before there were people to walk in it, before Odin ever climbed the tree that would nearly kill him, the gods had to decide what shape this borrowed, doomed, extraordinary world would take. That shaping is where we go next. So the world was a body, and the body had a shape, but a shape needs an axis, a spine to hang creation upon. The Norse who told these stories gave that axis a form no other mythology quite matches. Not a dome, not a disk, not a ladder of heaven stacked one above the next. They imagined the cosmos as a tree, Yggdrasil, the world ash. In the telling of the poetic Edda, and in the prose Edda both, its canopy spreads over all that exists, and its trunk runs like a spine through the middle of all things. Picture it at full scale, a grey-gold ash so vast that the eye cannot find its crown, its branches carrying the weight of realms, the way lesser trees carry only leaves. The gods and giants and dead and living inhabit worlds arranged along it. It is the single structure that makes the 9 realms one cosmos instead of 9 scattered places. and where a lesser story would leave a tree simply standing, the Norse imagination reached down into its roots, because that is where the meaning lives. 3 roots, the texts describe, each plunging into a different world. One root reaches up into Asgard, the realm of the ruling gods, and coils around a shining well where 3 figures sit. But hold them a moment. They are the heart of this chapter, and they deserve their own breath. A second root strikes down toward the country of the frost giants, to a well of pure wisdom guarded by a watchful head named Mímir, whose waters a certain one-eyed god will one day come to buy at a terrible price. But that is a debt for later. And the third root sinks all the way into Niflheim, into the cold at the bottom of creation, where a dragon called Nidhogg gnaws at the root without rest, day after age, forever eating at the base of the world. Sit with that image, because it is the whole of Norse cosmology in a single frame. The tree that holds up creation is being devoured at its own root from the first day. The structure is alive, and the structure is already being consumed. The Norse did not imagine a world resting on stable foundations that some later catastrophe might one day disturb. They imagined foundations already under attack. A cosmos whose ruin is not an event waiting in the distance, but a pressure present in the wood from the beginning, gnawed a little thinner with each turning of the ages. Now, those 3 figures at the well beneath the first root. This is where the Norse said something about fate that the gods themselves could not talk their way out of. The well was called the Well of Urd, and beside it, the texts say, sat 3 women who knew a great deal. The poetic Edda names them plainly. From the lake beneath the tree came 3 girls, deep in knowledge. One is called Urd, the second Verdandi, the third Skuld. Read the names and the whole of the Norse worldview opens up. Urd is what has become, the past, that which is fixed and can never be unmade. Verdandi is the becoming, the present, the thread passing through the fingers even now. And Skuld is what shall be, debt, necessity, the weight owed that must one day be paid. These are the Norns. And in Norse belief, as the texts describe it, they shape the lives of everyone born, measuring out fate, cutting the thread, setting the length of each life at its beginning. Here is the line that changes the temperature of the entire saga. The Norns weave the fate of gods and of men alike, not men only, the gods too. Even the immortal, all-seeing rulers of Asgard have their threads already spun and already cut, and the tradition is unambiguous that the gods cannot alter what the Norns have said. Hold the 2 halves of this chapter together now, and you can feel the engine of the myth running beneath it. The cosmos hangs on a tree that is being eaten at its root. And beside that tree sit 3 weavers, whose work binds even the gods to an ending they did not choose and cannot escape. The architecture of this world is not neutral. It is not an open stage upon which anything might happen. It is built from its axis to its roots to the loom at its base, to arrive at a fate that is already written. That is the fact to carry forward through each triumph and each clever escape still to come. When a god wins, the Norns have already measured the win. When a god survives, the thread already knows the day it ends. Foreknowledge is not a mood in this mythology. It is the load-bearing beam of the building. And here, we should stop for one honest moment, the moment a documentary owes you and a Wikipedia summary never gives. Who says any of this? Where does a tree with 3 roots and 3 weavers of fate actually come from? The honest answer is 2 Icelandic books, and it is worth holding that thought. The first is the Poetic Edda, older, spare, elusive poems preserved mainly in the Codex Regius, copied around 1270. The second is the Prose Edda, a connected, orderly retelling composed around 1220 by a Christian Icelander named Snorri Sturluson, whose neat narrative hand scholars read as one man's systematizing of a belief already centuries dead. But the verses inside those pages carry oral tradition scholars trace to the 9th through 11th centuries, composed and recited in the Viking Age itself long before any hand set them down. When both Eddas agree, the picture is old and stable. Where only Snorri gives us the story, we will say so and hold it more lightly. That discipline governs every claim ahead, which is exactly why they gave the world tree 3 roots and set the weavers beneath it. This was a people describing not just where they lived, but the shape of the trap they lived inside. The tree stands, the dragon eats, the Norns weave, and along that great grey-gold axis, in the realms strung out upon its branches, the gods are about to begin the long work of preparing for a fate they can already, faintly, feel coming. One god most of all will refuse to look away from it. He will trade pieces of himself for the power to see the ending in full. And what he pays and what he learns is where this story turns next. The world now had its tree, its wells, its Norns already cutting the threads. What it did not yet have was us. On the edge of the new land, where the sea met the shore, the gods came upon 2 pieces of driftwood, one ash, one elm, shaped like men but empty of all that makes a man. And the prose. Edda records that 3 gods did the shaping. Odin breathed into the wood the first breath, and it lived. Honor gave it sense, thought, awareness, the capacity to know that it was alive. And the third, a god the texts call Ladr, gave it blood and warmth and the good color of a living face. Ash and elm became Ask and Embla, the first man, the first woman, wood woken into flesh by the sons of the gods. Hold on that image, because it tells you a great deal about how the Norse understood themselves. Other peoples imagined humanity fashioned from clay by a potter, or spoken into being by a word. The Norse looked at 2 dead sticks on a cold beach and saw their ancestors. We were salvage. We were strays the gods found and decided to wake. And who Lodur truly was, the scholars still argue. Some read him as another face of Loki, others as a forgotten god lost from all the other tales. But the Voluspa is careful, and so are we. He is Ladr, the 3rd giver, and no more than that. But before humankind could spread across Midgard, the powers of the world had a reckoning of their own to settle. For there were 2 families of gods, and they did not begin as friends. The Aesir were the gods of sky and war and rule, Odin's kindred, the household of storm and sovereignty. The Vanir were older and stranger, gods of the sea, of the fields, of fertility and gold, and the deep magic of foresight. And the Voluspa remembers that the first war ever fought in all the worlds was fought between them, spears flung across the battle line, the wall of Asgard broken, the gods themselves bleeding. Neither side could win, neither side would yield, so they made peace, and the way they made it, in Snorri's account, tells you how alien these powers really are. To seal the truce, every god of both families came to a single vessel and spat into it, and from that mingled spittle they shaped a living being, Kvasir, wisest of all the wise, a creature so full of knowledge that no question in the 9 worlds could defeat him. Peace made flesh, and to bind the two houses forever, they traded hostages. In Snorri's telling, the Vanir sent their finest, Njord and his children Freyr and Freya, gods of the sea and the harvest and desire, to live among the Aesir, while the Aesir sent Honor and wise Mímir the other way. From that exchange, the pantheon we know was forged, sky gods and earth gods under one roof, the family of the North complete. And notice who is at the center of it, hungry for what Kvasir represents. Odin. Because here is the pivot the whole saga turns upon. Odin does not want power. Odin wants to know. And in this cosmos, knowledge is never given. It is only ever bought, and the price is always a piece of yourself. Beneath the second root of the world tree lay a well, and in that well, guarded by the severed-headed wisdom of Mímir, was the knowledge of all things, past and to come. Odin went down to it and asked to drink, and the guardian named his price, not gold, not tribute, an eye. One of the All-Father's own eyes dropped into the dark water as a pledge. The Prose Edda records that Odin did not hesitate. He gave it, and the Voluspa knows exactly where it went. Well, I know, Odin, where you hid your eye, in the famous well of Mímir. From that day, the highest god of the North looked out on his own doom with a single eye, and saw it more clearly than any two-eyed creature ever could. That was the first price. The second is the strangest sacrifice in all of mythology, because in it, Odin pays himself to himself. The Havamal preserves his own voice describing it. He took a spear and drove it into his own body. He climbed the world tree, and he hanged there, wounded, starving, given over to death for 9 full nights, swinging in the wind above a void so deep no one knows what lies beneath it. No one fed him, no one brought him water. He hung as a sacrifice with no god to receive it but himself. Given to Odin, myself to myself, the poem says, on that tree which no man knows from what roots it rises. And on the 9th night, staring down into the dark, he saw them, the runes, the secret shapes of knowledge and magic rising up out of the deep. He seized them, screaming, and fell from the tree changed forever. Think about what that ritual actually means, because it is the key to the entire pantheon. Odin is the king of the gods. He could command. Instead, he chooses agony. He wounds himself, hangs himself, blinds himself, and each wound buys him a little more of the one faculty he is truly starving for, which is foreknowledge. And foreknowledge, in the North, brings no comfort. Each drink from Mimir's well, each rune torn from the tree, only shows him more sharply the same unbearable picture. The war at the end of the world, and the gods losing it. He is not gathering wisdom to save his people. He is gathering it because he cannot look away. And once you understand that, you understand the last and greatest of his preparations, a hall that most people mistake for a paradise. We call it Valhalla, the hall of the slain, and we imagine it a reward, feasting and glory for warriors who died well. But read what the Prose Edda actually describes, and it is not a heaven at all. It is a barracks. Every man who falls in battle is claimed by Odin's shield maidens, the Valkyries, and carried up to this hall. And there, day after day, the chosen dead do not rest. They arm themselves and march out and fight each other to the death, and at dusk their wounds close and the dead rise whole, and they feast, and at dawn they do it again. An endless drill, an army rehearsing. 540 doors in that hall, the texts say, and from each one, 800 warriors could march out shoulder to shoulder. Do the arithmetic Odin did, and the number is monstrous, an ocean of the dead, gathered not for their glory, but for his war. The one-eyed king who traded his sight to see the end has spent every century since raising a legion for the day the prophecy comes true. He is not the giver of paradise. He is a general, hoarding soldiers against a battle he already knows he loses, and preparing for it anyway with all he has. That is the shape of this mythology in one figure. Not a god of thunder throwing his weight around. A god who bought the knowledge of his own defeat, one piece of himself at a time, and then went to work. But even the All-Father, with his single-seeing eye and his hole full of the dead, had not accounted for one complication. He had a companion at his side through half these tales, clever, charming, indispensable, whose own children were already growing in a far-off land, and those children would be the hinge on which the fate of the gods turned. There is a stretch of the story the texts linger on with obvious delight, the long, bright middle before the darkness closes in. The gods are established now. Asgard stands, and into that settled world walks the one figure who will hold this saga together and then, at the last, pull it apart. To understand the catastrophe that follows, you have to understand him first. The prose Edda gives him to us in a single contradictory breath, the being who brought the Aesir into great trouble and often helped them out again with his cunning contrivances. The same source calls him the originator of deceit, and in the next line, the indispensable companion of the gods on nearly every road they walk. That contradiction is not a flaw in the telling. It is the point of him. Loki is beautiful, and he is quick, and he can wear any shape he likes. And the truth the gods will not admit to themselves is that they cannot function without him. Consider what they would lack if he had never existed. To see it, we have to go down under the roots of the mountains into the forges of the dwarves, where the treasures of the gods were made. Scholars are careful here, and so are we. The fullest version of this forging comes to us in the tradition Snorri records, his 13th century systematizing hand, shaping a tale the older poems only gesture at. But what a tale it is! It begins, as trouble with Loki so often does, with a prank that went too far. He had cut off the golden hair of Sif, Thor's wife, and Thor, being Thor, promised to break every bone in his body unless it was restored. So Loki went to the dwarves, and what he brought back was not one wonder, but a cascade of them, because he could not resist turning the errand into a wager. He bet his own head that the sons of Ivaldi could forge no finer gifts than the dwarf Brokkr and his brother could, and then, terrified he might lose, he turned himself into a fly and bit the working dwarf on the eyelid to spoil the bellows. Here is the detail that outlives all the rest. As Brokkr labored at the forge, in the tradition Snorri records, the fly settled and bit, and the hammer that came out of that fire came out with a handle too short. Mjolnir, the single most recognizable object in all of world mythology, a weapon so central the Norse wore it around their necks in iron and silver, was born with a defect because a trickster in the shape of an insect could not help himself. And still, it was judged the greatest of all the gifts. The rest of the hoard came with it. Gungnir, the spear that never misses its mark. Draupnir, the arm ring of red gold that in Snorri's telling drips 8 rings of equal weight on the 9th night, abundance made mechanical. Skidbladnir, the ship for the god Freyr, large enough to carry the entire company of gods, yet foldable like a cloth to be tucked in a pouch. Each wonder the Aesir owned, they owned because Loki gambled his own head and lost. And when the dwarf came to collect that head, Loki wriggled free on a technicality. The wager was for the head, he argued, and said nothing about the neck. So they sewed his lips shut instead. It is the perfect miniature of him. He wins the world its treasures, he cheats his way out of the price, and he walks away with his mouth stitched, punished, uncontained, and already smiling underneath. Now the weapon exists. And no story loves that weapon more than the one the gods would rather you never heard. One morning, Thor woke and reached for the hammer at his side, and it was gone. The mightiest object in the 9 worlds, the instrument that stood between the gods and the frost giants, stolen in the night. This is the poetic Edda's Thrimskvida, and it is the most purely delightful poem the tradition preserves. The giant Thrym had taken Mjolnir and buried it 8 leagues deep in the earth, and he named his price for its return. He wanted Freya, most radiant of the goddesses, as his bride. The gods gathered, and into that grim council came Loki, with the plan that only Loki would dare to say aloud. If the giant wanted a bride, then a bride he would receive. Dress Thor, enormous, red-bearded, thunder-tempered Thor in the wedding veil, and send him to Jotunheim as the blushing Freya. Thor's fury at the suggestion is one of the great comic moments in the literature. The gods overruled him. Loki went along as the handmaiden, veiled beside him. And so the god of thunder sat at the wedding table in a bridal gown, and very nearly gave the game away by eating like a god at war. An entire ox, 8 salmon, all the dainties laid out for the women, and 3 casks of mead. The giant marveled that he had never seen a bride with such an appetite. Each time suspicion rose, Loki was there at the veil with a lie ready. She has not eaten in 8 nights. So eager was she for Jotunheim. Her eyes burn because she has not slept for longing. The whole doom-shadowed saga turns, here, into a farce held together entirely by the trickster's tongue. And then the giants brought out the hammer to hallow the marriage and laid it in the bride's lap. That was the end of the joke. Thor took up Mjolnir, and every giant in that hall died before the veil had fallen from his face. Note what makes it possible. Without Loki's scheme, the hammer stays buried and the gods stay defenseless. He is, for now, the reason they survive. That is the shape of him you have to hold in your mind, because the same cleverness that saves them here is the cleverness that will one day bring them down. The gods marched under a sentence already passed. And the reason these tales matter, the reason they are not merely amusing, is that the gods knew. The prophecy had already been spoken, and still they lived and laughed and fought and won. Which brings us to the day the mightiest of them all learned exactly how small he was. Thor journeyed east into the giant lands and came at last to a vast stronghold, the hall of Loki, a giant whose very name mocks the trickster. And there, as Gylfaginning records it, Thor was humiliated 3 times over and never once understood how. He was set to empty a drinking horn in a single draught, and though he drank until his heart nearly burst, the level barely dropped. He was challenged to lift a common gray house cat from the floor, and strained with all the strength that holds up the sky, and raised only a single paw. He was told to wrestle an old withered woman, and this greatest of warriors was forced to one knee by a crone he could not budge. Only as he departed did the giant confess the truth, and the confession is the whole meaning of the tale. As Gylfaginning records it, the horn's far end was set in the sea itself. Thor had been drinking down the ocean, and his failure had lowered the tides across the world. The grey cat was no cat, but Jörmungandr, the serpent that encircles all the earth, and Thor had hauled it so high, its back arched against heaven. And the old woman was Ellie, old age, against whom no living creature has ever prevailed or ever will. The strongest god in creation had wrestled time, and time had barely troubled to fight back. That is the lesson under all the wonder. The cosmos the gods think they command is larger and stranger and more certain of its ending than even they can grasp. And these are not dead names in a dead book. Look at your own week. Wednesday is Odin's day, Woden's day, worn down by 1,000 years of speech. Thursday belongs to Thor, the very god at that wedding table, still thundering through the ordinary calendar. Tuesday keeps the name of Tyr. Friday holds Frigg. We speak these gods aloud weekly and never hear them. And there is one more word the Norse handed forward, berserk. It comes from the berserker, the warrior who fought in a battle madness so total it seemed more than human. And the old scholarship still cannot fully settle what the name meant, whether berserker is the bare shirt of a man who took on the beast's fury, or the bare chest of one who scorned armor entirely. Both readings survive. The ambiguity itself is a kind of monument. The gods of this saga are not gone. They are folded into the language, waiting, the way the reckoning was always waiting under the golden days. But the golden days were borrowed, each treasure forged, each giant outwitted, each feast survived. All of it was lived on time the gods knew they did not have. And the one who forged the treasures, who saved them at the wedding, who walked beside them on every road, he was about to stop helping. The trickster's cleverness had one turn left in it, and it would fall on the brightest god of all. There is a moment in the sagas when Loki stops being merely the clever one at the gods' table, the charmer who talks his way out of each disaster he talks the gods into. That moment is not a betrayal, and it is not a battle. It is the arrival of his children. Because in Jotunheim, in the land of the giants, with the giantess Angerboda, Loki fathered 3 creatures, and the prose Edda records that when the gods looked upon them, they did not see 3 children. They saw the end of the world, given faces, a wolf, a serpent, and a girl who was living down one side of her body and dead down the other. Consider what that means for the gods who prided themselves on foreknowledge. Odin had paid an eye to see what was coming, and now, as the tradition preserved in the prose, Edda tells it, what was coming was walking through Asgard on 4 legs, small and grey and hungry, the wolf they named Fenrir. A god who knows the future has a terrible advantage and a terrible burden. He can see the shape of the disaster. He simply cannot see a path away from it that is not itself a step toward it. So he tried anyway. And this is the pattern of the act. Watch it closely, because it is the thesis of this entire saga made visible. Each thing the gods do to protect themselves from these 3 is the exact thing that dooms them. Take the serpent first, the middle child. As the prose Edda has it, Odin took Jörmungandr and cast him down into the deep sea that surrounds all the lands of the world. A tidy solution: throw the monster into the ocean, let the depths swallow the problem. But a serpent thrown into an endless sea does not drown. It grows. It grew until it wrapped itself all the way around Midgard, the middle world of mortals, and closed its jaws upon its own tail. The gods had not disposed of the serpent. They had belted the human world with it. Every ship that sailed a Norse sea sailed over the coils of a monster the gods had put there themselves, trying to be safe. Then the daughter, Hel. Odin cast her down into Niflheim, the world of cold and mist below all the others. And in the account the prose Edda gives us, he gave her dominion over 9 worlds, and made her the keeper of all who die of sickness and old age, rather than by the sword. Think about the arithmetic of that. He did not merely exile her, he handed her a kingdom and a subject population that grows with each death that is not glorious, which is to say, most deaths, in every age. He made his enemy's daughter the sovereign of the dead. And when the end comes, she will not arrive alone. She will arrive with an army that the whole world has been feeding her, one quiet death at a time. And then there is the wolf. The gods did not exile Fenrir. That is the strange and human heart of this story. Of the 3 children, they kept the most dangerous one closest. They raised the wolf among themselves in Asgard, in the tradition the prose Edda preserves, perhaps out of some belief that a monster fed by your own hand will not turn on it. Only one of them was brave enough to feed him. Tyr, the war god, the god of oaths and single combat, was the only one who would walk up to Fenrir with meat in his hands. Remember that. The bravest of them chose the wolf. The wolf will remember it too. The wolf grew, not the way a dog grows, the way a prophecy grows. And as he grew, the gods grew afraid of the creature they were raising. In the hall they were raising it in. So they decided to bind him, not kill him. They had sworn no violence would stain their sanctuary, but bind him and call it safety. They forged a great iron fetter and called it Leidinga, and brought it to the wolf as a game. Let us see how strong you are, Fenrir, whether you can break this. He let them chain him. Then he stretched once, and the iron burst across the floor of the world. They forged a second, twice as strong, and named it Dromi, and made the same game of it. Fenrir strained and kicked, and the fetter shattered into pieces that flew so far they became a proverb. And from that day the Norse had 2 sayings for escaping by main force: to get loose out of Leidinga, to dash out of Dromi. The gods' failures became figures of speech. Even their defeats entered the language. Now the gods understood that no iron would hold this. So Odin sent down into the dark to the dwarves, the smiths beneath the mountains, who make what cannot be made, and commissioned a fetter of a different kind. And what the dwarves wove was not iron at all. They wove it from 6 impossible things: from the sound of a cat's footfall, from the beard of a woman, from the roots of a mountain, from the sinews of a bear, from the breath of a fish, and from the spittle of a bird. And if you ask, as the gods themselves must have, why none of these things can now be found in the world, why a cat makes no sound when it walks, why a mountain has no visible roots, why a bird seems to have no spit, the answer the myth gives is quietly perfect. They cannot be found because the dwarves used them all up, spinning this one ribbon. They took what could not be caught and made a leash of it. They called it Gleipnir, and it was smooth as a silken band, light as breath, and stronger than anything that has ever been strong. They brought it to a lonely island and laid it before the wolf as one more game. But Fenrir was not a fool, and a wolf who has broken 2 mountains worth of iron looks at a silk ribbon and understands that it is either nothing or it is everything. He could smell the cunning on it, and so he set a condition. He would let them bind him with this pretty thing if, as a pledge of good faith, one of the gods would lay his hand between the wolf's jaws while it was done. Silence around the ring of the gods. Because each of them knew the truth in that moment. The ribbon would hold, and so the hand would not come back. Not one of them moved. Not the All-Father who had ordered all of this. Not one of the heroes whose names still fill the halls of the slain. They stood there, the immortals, and they did the arithmetic. And the arithmetic said, "Your hand or the world." And they chose to keep their hands. Except one. Tyr, the same Tyr who had been the only one brave enough to feed the wolf when he was small, walked forward and without a word laid his right hand into the mouth of Fenrir. And the gods bound the wolf in the silk, and Fenrir strained against it, and the more he fought, the tighter and harder it held, exactly as the dwarves had promised. He could not break it. He would never break it, not until the last day of the world, when everything breaks at once. And when the wolf understood that he had been tricked, that these laughing gods had never meant to let him loose, he closed his jaws. The prose Edda says that all the gods laughed at the sight of the wolf chained, all of them except Tyr, who lost his hand. And there it is, the whole saga in a single frozen picture. The immortals laughing, and the one honest god among them holding a bleeding stump, having paid alone the price of everyone's safety. It is worth noticing that even the poems that do not tell this tale confirm its scar. In the poetic Edda, Loki himself will one day mock Tyr to his face for the hand that Fenrir tore away. The wound was real enough that the gods' own songs could not forget it. So count the cost of this act before we leave it. The serpent thrown into the sea grew vast enough to circle the world. The daughter, handed a realm, became sovereign of an army that has never stopped recruiting. The wolf, bound by a ribbon, now waits on an island with every reason to hate the gods who put him there, held in place by nothing but silk and the length of a prophecy. The gods had not defeated their doom. They had built it carefully with their own hands and set it aside for later. And a bound thing, the Norse knew, is only ever a thing that is waiting. But binding wolves is grim work, and the gods of the north did not spend all their days in dread. There was still a hammer to swing, and a giant land to trouble, and one god who would rather laugh in the face of fate than sit and watch it come. And so, while the wolf waited by his silken cord, the thunder went walking. Of all the sons of Odin, one was loved above the rest. Baldr, the fairest, the most gentle, the god so radiant that light seemed to follow him across the halls of Asgard. And it is here, with the brightest of them, that the long shadow of the prophecy finally touches the ground. Because Baldr began to dream, not the ordinary dreams of a god at rest. These were dreams of his own death, dark, insistent, returning night after night, closing around him like a hand. The prose Edda tells us the dreams so troubled him that he carried them into the daylight, and the gods, seeing the fear on the face of the one who feared nothing, grew afraid themselves. For a hall that had trained an army of the dead against a war it knew was coming, this was a different kind of dread, quieter, more personal, and much closer. Frigg would not wait for the prophecy to arrive. Baldr's mother went out into the breadth of creation to make her son untouchable. She walked through the world and drew an oath from each thing in it, fire and water, iron and every kind of metal, stones, the earth itself, the trees, sicknesses, beasts, birds, and each creeping thing, an oath that none of them would ever do harm to Baldr. And all of them swore. Every element, every creature, every force that could wound a god bowed its head and promised. Consider what that meant. The bright god now stood beyond the reach of harm, and the gods turned it into a game. They gathered in the assembly and made sport of his invulnerability. They hurled stones at him, struck at him with blades, loosed arrows, and each weapon simply fell away. Nothing could touch Baldr. It became a joy to them, a bright ceremony of relief in a doomed world, proof, for one shining moment, that they could hold something back from fate. But Frigg, walking the world and gathering her oaths, had passed over one small thing. The mistletoe. It grew west of Valhalla, and when she came to it, she thought it too young, too soft, too slight to swear an oath, too harmless to matter. So she asked nothing of it and moved on. One overlooked sprig in all of creation, and that gap, that single unclosed door, is where the fate the gods had feared for so long would finally walk through. Loki noticed. Of course he did. He had walked at the side of these gods through every adventure, mended each disaster his own cleverness set in motion, and here, in their brightest hour of celebration, something in him turned. Snorri tells us he took the shape of a woman and went to Frigg, and drew from her, in idle talk, the one detail she had left undefended. She had nothing to fear, she told the stranger, from the little mistletoe west of Valhalla, too young to swear. That was all Loki needed. He went and cut the mistletoe. He shaped it, this soft, overlooked plant, into a dart, and he carried it back to the assembly, where the gods were still at their joyful game, still throwing all they had at Baldr and laughing as it fell harmless to the ground. At the edge of the ring stood a figure taking no part in the sport. Herda, Baldr's own brother, and blind. He could not see where his brother stood. He had no weapon to throw and no way to join the other's joy. And Loki came to him, gentle and helpful as he had always seemed. "Why do you not honor Baldr like the rest?" he asked. Herda answered that he could not see where Baldr stood, and that he had nothing to throw. Then Loki put the mistletoe dart into the blind god's hand and guided his aim. "Throw this," he said. "I will show you where he stands." Herda threw. The dart flew true. It struck Baldr, and it passed through him, and the brightest of the gods fell dead to the ground. The prose Edda calls it the greatest misfortune that had ever befallen gods and men. And it is worth marking exactly how it came. Not by the strength of any enemy, not by the great wolf or the world-serpent that the gods had spent lifetimes guarding against, but by the softest object in the world, aimed by a blind and innocent hand, in the middle of a game meant to celebrate that nothing could go wrong. The fate the Norns had woven did not break down the gate. It slipped through the one seam a loving mother left open, carried by the one companion the gods trusted most. Even then, they did not surrender their brightest to the dark. A rider was sent down the long road to Hel, to the ruler of the dead in her cold realm below, to beg for Baldr back. And Hel gave her answer, and it was almost mercy. Let Baldr return on one condition: if every single thing in all the worlds, living and dead, would weep for him, she would release him. If all things mourned, the bright god could ride home. So the gods sent word to the breadth of creation. weep. And creation wept. Men wept, and beasts wept, and the earth and the stones wept. The trees wept, and the metals wept. All that had once sworn Frigg's oath now shed its tears to buy back the god that oath had failed to save. It is one of the most tender images in all the myths, a universe crying so that light might come back into it. All of creation wept, except one. In a cave sat a giantess who gave her name as Thok, and when the messengers came to her and asked her to weep for Baldr, she would not. Let hell keep what she holds, she said, dry-eyed, unmoved, the single hard heart in a weeping world. And because one being would not shed a tear, the ransom failed. Baldr stayed among the dead. Snorri tells us the truth of it, that the giantess in the cave was Loki, in one last disguise. The charmer who had walked with the gods for an age had now killed their most beloved twice over, first with the dart, and then with a refusal, closing the one door that could have brought him home. And here the gods stopped laughing. Their patience, stretched thin across 100 of Loki's schemes, finally snapped. They hunted him. He fled into the mountains and, cornered, threw himself into a river in the shape of a salmon. But they caught him even so and dragged him back for a punishment fit for what he had done. They took 3 flat stones and set them on edge, and they bound Loki across them, bound the shapeshifter, the trickster, the indispensable one, with cords that hardened into iron. And above his upturned face, a serpent was fixed, so that its venom would drip, slow and endless, onto him. Only Sigyn, his wife, stayed. She stands over him with a basin, catching the venom drop by drop. But when the basin fills and she turns aside to empty it, the poison falls upon Loki's face, and he writhes against his bonds so violently that the earth shakes. That, the Norse said, is what an earthquake is, the bound god, straining beneath the world. And so the shape of the ending was set. The prophecy that Odin had bought with an eye and 9 nights on the tree was no longer a distant thing whispered by a dead seeress. It had a mechanism now. The bright god was in the land of the dead. The trickster was chained beneath the mountains, and he would not lie quiet forever. Each strand the Norns had wound was drawing tight, and out beyond the walls of Asgard, the first of the great winters had already begun to fall. For an age, the doom of the gods had been a matter of prophecy, a shape whispered by a dead seeress, a fate the Norns had woven and set aside, a wolf on a ribbon and a trickster on a rock. It was known, it was feared, but it had not yet begun. That is the strange mercy the gods had lived under all this time. They carried the end in their heads, but not yet in their world. That mercy ends now, and the first sign of it is not a monster or a fire. It is the cold. The Norse texts describe a winter unlike any the world had known, a winter called Fimbulwinter, the mighty winter, 3 long winters coming one after another, with no summer to break them. Snow drives in from each quarter of the sky. The frost bites deep and does not loosen its grip. The sun climbs but gives no warmth, and there is no joy in her light. Imagine 3 years in which the ice never retreats, 3 years in which the world simply forgets how to be green. That is where it starts, not with a battle cry, but with a silence and a whiteness closing over the land. And before that unbroken winter, the text describes something worse than the cold, because the cold only kills the body, and this killed the bond that held the world together. The Prose Edda records 3 winters of war spread across the world, an age when men turned on one another for gain, when brothers became each other's killers, when the old certainties a person could count on simply dissolved. No kinship held, no oath was safe. A father would not spare his son, nor a son his father. The Norse called this the Sword Age, the Axe Age, the time when the moral floor of the world gave way, and hand was raised against hand. Mark what is happening here, because it is the deepest logic of the whole saga. The world was built from a murder, a giant's body cut apart to make the earth and the sea and the sky. Death was woven into its first stone. And now, at the far end of time, the world does not fall to some foreign enemy from outside. It comes apart from within, along the very seam it was made from. Brother against brother. The end is only the beginning, arriving at last. Then the chains begin to break. Remember what the gods had done across the long ages to hold their doom at bay. They had cast the world-serpent into the deep sea. They had sent hell down to rule the dead. They had bound the wolf Fenrir with a ribbon no strength could snap, at the cost of Tyr's right hand. They had chained Loki himself across 3 stones beneath the mountains, with a serpent dripping venom on his upturned face. Each threat they had answered with a binding. And each binding, the Norse understood, was only ever a delay. Now the delay is over. The texts describe the wolves in the sky at last catching what they had chased since the beginning of the world. One wolf swallows the sun, another seizes the moon and swallows her too. The lights that had ridden the heavens since creation are simply gone, snuffed out, and the stars fall from their places in the dark. The great ash Yggdrasil, the tree that holds all the worlds on its trunk, begins to shudder from root to crown, groaning as the frame of the cosmos itself shakes loose. And on the heaving sea, every fetter and fastening in creation gives way at once. Fenrir comes free. The wolf who was fostered among the gods, bound with a silken cord and the sacrifice of a hand, breaks his chain at last, and the texts give him a scale beyond anything human. His mouth gapes so wide that his lower jaw scrapes the earth and his upper jaw rakes the sky. There is no more room in the world than that mouth can fill. Fire burns in his eyes and streams from his nostrils. He had waited an age with the god's hand still in his belly, and now he walks free into a world that has run out of summers. The world-serpent comes ashore, Jörmungandr, whom Odin cast into the ocean so long ago that it grew until it circled the whole earth and bit its own tail. It rises from the deep, and the sea surges up and over the land as it comes. Its writhing throws the ocean across the world. Its breath poisons air and water alike. The barrier the gods had trusted to hold the end at bay, the encircling sea itself, is the very force that now spills forward to drown them. And beneath the mountains, the rock splits. Loki, the charmer, the indispensable one, the god whose venom torment had shaken the earth for so long that the Norse named their earthquakes after him, rises from his bonds. The bright god's killer, freed at last, turns from the forces of order he once traveled beside, and takes his place at the head of the forces of the dead. The ship Naglfar breaks its moorings, a vessel built from the untrimmed nails of the dead, and Loki steers it toward the field where the world will end. From the burning south, the fire giant Surtur marches out with a sword brighter than the sun. From each quarter of the ruined world, The enemies of the gods converge on one vast plain, Yggdrasil, the field of battle, wide enough to hold the ending. And here, before the two hosts close the last distance between them, pause and feel how near these gods still are to us. Because we say their names on schedule and have forgotten that we do. Tuesday is Tyr's Day, the god who gave his hand to the wolf now loose upon the field. Wednesday is Woden's Day, Odin's Day, the All-Father marching, spear in hand, toward the very doom he bought an eye to see. Thursday is Thor's Day, the Thunder God's Day. Friday carries the name of Frigg, the mother who wept for Baldr. The whole world over, our ordinary week still turns on the axis of these gods, walking to their end, their names surviving, quiet and unnoticed, long after the culture that first spoke them in awe had passed away. This is not some distant, sealed-off story. Its echo is in your calendar. You have been counting the days by it your entire life. Now the last distance closes. On one side, the wolf with the burning eyes, the serpent trailing the ruined sea, the fire giant with his blazing sword, the trickster at the helm of the ship of the dead, and behind them all the hosts of the giants and the dead of hell. On the other, the gods come out to meet them, Odin at their head in his gold helmet, the spear Gungnir in his hand, and streaming behind him the army of the slain he had gathered in Valhalla across the ages. This was what that horde of the dead had always been for. Not glory, not paradise. This. The general who had prepared his existence for a war he already knew he would lose was marching at last into that war, clear-eyed, unflinching, exactly on time. The prophecy had become a winter, and the winter had become a march. The chains were broken, the feared had come, and on the plain of Yggdrasil, under a sky with no sun and no moon left in it, the doom the Norns had woven from the beginning of the world stood ready, at last, to be fought. And so they came at last to the field. The chains had broken. The sun and the moon had been run down and swallowed. The great ash Yggdrasil, which had held the 9 worlds on its branches since the first morning, trembled from root to crown. And across a churning sea, the ship Naglfar came on, driven by the tide of a drowning world, and standing at its helm, freed after his long age beneath the mountains, was Loki. The charmer who had walked at the god's side through every adventure, who had killed the bright god twice over, now steered the dead toward Asgard's gate. All the Norns had woven, all Odin had seen and could not unsee, had drawn down to this one plain. The Norse called it Vigrid, a field, the text's record, 100 leagues on every side, and it was here that the biography of the gods would reach the page it had always been written toward. Watch them take the field, because the whole thesis of this story stands in what they do next. They knew. That is the fact to hold on to as the armies close. Odin had bought this knowledge with an eye at Mímir's well and 9 nights hanged upon the tree. He had filled Valhalla with the chosen dead precisely against this hour. Each god marching out onto Vigrid marched knowing, from a prophecy older than the war itself, that they were about to lose. And they went anyway. Out of the 540 doors of Valhalla, the Einherjar came, 800 abreast from each, the army of the fallen that Odin had gathered across all the ages for exactly this dawn. At their head rode the All-Father himself, gold helmet gleaming, the spear Gungnir in his fist, the spear that never missed. And he rode straight for the one enemy the world had been built around fearing. Fenrir was loose. The wolf that a chain of impossible things had held, the wolf that had taken Tyr's hand as the price of that binding, came onto the plain with his lower jaw against the earth and his upper jaw against the sky, and fire ran from his eyes and from his nostrils. Odin closed with him, the god of wisdom, against the beast his own foreknowledge had marked from its birth, and the wolf swallowed him. The wisest being in all the 9 worlds, the one who had given up an eye simply to see this coming, went down into Fenrir's throat exactly as the prophecy had always said he would. Foreknowledge in the end bought him no escape. It only let him meet the wolf with his eyes open. But the son avenges the father. Vidar, Odin's silent son, strode up to the wolf, and here the Norse imagination is savagely exact. He set one foot upon Fenrir's lower jaw, and the poets say his shoe was made for this alone. With his hands he seized the upper jaw, and he tore the great wolf apart. The beast that ate the All-Father is unmade in a single stride. It is a small, cold mercy in a battle with almost none, and it too was foretold. Now turn to the son of the earth. Thor, the hammer-hand, the one who had held the frontier of Midgard against the giants his whole life, met the enemy that had always truly been his. Jörmungandr, the world-serpent, his brother in doom, the coil that circled the whole earth and bit its own tail. This was the reckoning the Norse had promised since the serpent was first flung into the sea. Thor swung Mjolnir and struck the serpent dead. And then, this is the detail the texts will not spare him, he stepped back from the creature he had killed 9 paces. And on the 9th, the venom the dying serpent had breathed over him took hold, and the strongest of the gods fell dead in the poisoned air. He won, and winning killed him. There is no cleaner image in all the myths for the shape of this story. On Vigrid, every triumph costs the one who wins it everything. Keep count as they fall, because each of these deaths was named in order in a prophecy spoken before the war began. The Norns are not improvising. They are reading from a page written at the start of the world. Freya, bright lord of the Vanir, giver of sun and rain and harvest, went out against Surtur, the fire giant who came from the burning south with a sword brighter than the sun. And Freya had no sword to answer him. He had given his own away long before, traded it for love, and now on the last field that bargain came due. He fell. Then the 2 oldest enemies found each other in the ruin. Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, who had stood at the rainbow's edge since the beginning, listening for exactly this day, and Loki, the traitor who had steered the dead to this shore. The bright warden and the shapeshifter who had unmade the gods from within closed at last, and they killed each other, each taking the other down into the dark. The charmer's long story ends here, on the same field, by the hand of the one god who had never trusted his smile. And Tyr, the god who had already surrendered his sword hand into a wolf's jaws so that Fenrir might be bound at all, met the hound of the underworld, Garmr, loosed from the gates of hell. The god of the pledge and the hound of the dead tore each other apart, and both went down. Worth marking as they fall that these are not distant names. The one-handed god still stands in our week. Tuesday is Tyr's day. Thursday belongs to the Thunderer, dying 9 paces from the serpent. Wednesday is the All-Fathers, gone down the wolf's throat. The gods perishing on this plane are the ones whose names we still say without knowing whom we are naming. And then it was finished. Surtur, last on the field, flung his fire across the whole of creation. The flames took Asgard and Midgard and the 9 worlds alike. They climbed the trembling ash of Yggdrasil. They poured over the land the gods had made from the first murdered giant's body in the beginning. The stars fell out of the sky, and the sea, as the Völuspá foretells it, rose up and drew the burning land down beneath the waves, until there was no earth left to burn, and no sky to hold it up, and no god left alive to see. The cosmos, assembled from a corpse in the first act of this story, went back into the dark it had come from. And here is what the prophecy had said from the very beginning. The knowledge Odin had paid an eye to learn and could never once change. They died exactly as foretold. Not one death on Vigrid departed from the script the Norns had woven before the world was young. The wolf took Odin. Thor and the serpent killed each other. Freyr fell for a sword he no longer held. Heimdall and Loki went down together. Tyr and the Hound tore each other apart, and the fire took the rest. All of it, precisely as it had been sung. Foreknowledge never bought the gods a way out. It was never going to. What it bought them was the one choice a doomed people can still make, the manner of their meeting. They did not flee the field. They did not beg the Norns for mercy they knew would not come. They marched out under a certain sentence and fought their doom to a standstill, and they died on their feet in the exact shape of the ending they had spent lifetimes preparing to face. The fire burned itself out. The waters closed over the ruin of the age. And in that silence, where the story could so easily have ended, where nearly every telling since has let it end, the Norse did something almost no doomed cosmology dares. They did not stop at the ash. And then it was over. The fire had done its work. Surtur had flung his flame across the 9 worlds, until the world tree itself was a torch against the dark, and the sea had climbed over the burning ruin, and the plain where the gods had died was under black water. The sun was gone. The stars had fallen out of the sky. There was no Asgard now, no Midgard, no bright hall of the slain, only the flat, cold, unbroken surface of the sea, closed over the whole of creation like a lid. This was the moment the whole saga had been marching toward from its first line. The doom the Völuspá had foretold, the war Odin had bought an eye and 9 nights on the tree to see coming, had arrived exactly as promised, and it had taken all of it. And then it was not over, because the seeress who spoke the Völuspá does not stop at the fire. Watch what she says next, because this is the part the modern world forgot, the part cut from nearly every version you have ever heard. The reason Ragnarok came to mean pure apocalypse when the texts themselves mean something stranger and far more hopeful. She looks past the drowned world, and she says, "I see the earth a second time rise up out of the sea. From beneath the water, the land comes back, green, fair, washed clean," and the prose Edda records it in the same wondering voice, that the earth rises again from the sea and is green and fair, and the fields unsown bring forth their harvests. There is no plow in this new world, no labor, no first hard winter to survive. The waterfalls fall, the eagle flies over the mountain hunting fish, and the grain simply grows where no hand ever planted it. The abundance the old world had to be built from a murder is, this time, just given, and not everyone is gone. Some walked out of the fire. Vidar and Vali, Odin's sons, the Avengers. the ones the prophecy had always said would outlast their father. They live, and the sea and Surtur's fire did not touch them. And Mordi and Magni come, Thor's own sons, and they carry Mjolnir between them, the hammer that killed the world-serpent, salvaged out of the ashes of the last battle. The gods who die at Ragnarök are the old generation, the ones who carried the knowledge and the guilt. What survives is the next one, the children, walking out onto grass their fathers never saw. But the strangest homecoming is still to come, because up out of the land of the dead, up the long cold road that only the dead were ever meant to walk, come two figures back into the light, Baldr and Herda, the bright god murdered by a sprig of mistletoe, and his blind brother, the innocent hand that threw it. In the old world they were killer and killed, the wound the whole doom had opened from. Here, in the new grass, they come back together, and there is no vengeance left in either of them. The debt is simply over. The prose Edda has them return from hell side by side, as though what could not be paid in the old world was quietly forgiven in the new one. Now, a scholar's word, because it matters before the next image lands. Where does this ending come from? The rebirth stands in 3 separate texts. The Völuspá, the prose Edda, and the Vafthrudnismal all attest it, which makes it one of the best documented beats in all of Norse eschatology, not some stray line one poet invented. And yet these poems were written down by Christian hands, generations after the old faith had gone, and serious scholars have long debated whether this green rebirth is genuinely the vision of the pagan North, or whether a later Christian hope of a redeemed and restored creation crept into the poem as it was set to parchment. That debate is real, and honest work does not paper over it. But mark this, whatever its origin, the rebirth is in the primary texts. The seeress does describe the earth rising green from the sea. The gods do come back to the grass. And here is the image the whole episode has been walking toward, the one small object at the center of everything. The surviving gods gather on the green plain of Yggdrasil, where Asgard once stood, and they sit down together in the grass. And they talk, not of war, of memory. They speak, the seeress says, of the mighty events of the old days, of the Midgard serpent that lay coiled around the world, of the runes of the fallen All-Father, the terrors of the last age recalled now the way survivors recall a storm they came through from the far side in the calm. And as they sit, they find, lying in the new grass, the golden gaming pieces. Stop on that. The golden taffel pieces, the game the gods had played in the innocent morning of the world, before the first giant fell, before Loki, before the wolf. The old world had them. The old world burned. And here they are again, in the grass of the new one, gleaming, undamaged, found, not the weapons, not the hordes of the slain, not the walls or the halls or the great treasures the dwarves forged. None of that came through the fire. What came through is the toy. The objects the gods made not out of fear of the end, but out of joy at the beginning. The saga tells you exactly what survives the death of a world. And it is not the armies. It is play. It is the memory of a time before anyone knew. And in a grove the fire could not reach, Hodmimir's wood, sheltered somewhere the flame never found, 2 human beings had hidden through the whole burning of the world. Leif and Yggdrasil, whose names mean near enough, life and the one who strives for life. They sheltered there, and while the 9 worlds died around them, They sustained themselves on nothing but the morning dew, and they lived. And when the earth rose green from the sea, they came out of the grove into a world washed empty and new. And from those two, the texts say, comes a race so numerous that it fills the whole earth again. A new sun rides the new sky, the daughter of the old sun, born before the wolf ever swallowed her mother, now grown, and driving her mother's course across the heavens. The wheel, having reached its bottom, turns back up. The gods of the north are the ones who were told plainly that they would lose, and who built the world, armed it, loved it, and marched out to the last battle anyway. A culture that had every reason to imagine its gods as invincible chose instead to imagine them as doomed, and then made that doom the highest form of nobility they knew. To do the right thing, to stand at the wall, to keep faith with the world, precisely because it will not save you. The scholars call it the doom frame, and they note how singular it is. No other great tradition builds its cosmos this way, out of a corpse, under a sentence, and answers the sentence not with a way out, but with green grass rising from the sea. So the survivors sit in the new grass, in the light of a sun that is the daughter of the sun that died, and they turn over in their hands the golden pieces of a game older than the war that ended the world, and they begin quietly to play again. And somewhere out past the edge of what these old poems tell us, that new world is filling with people, with weather, with kings and heroes and monsters no seeress has yet named. Because the North was never the only people to look up and try to explain the sky. Every tribe of humankind sat by its own fire and made gods to answer the dark. And their stories, the ones the Greeks told, and the Egyptians, and the ones told along the great rivers of the East, are every bit as strange and as vast as the one that ends here in the grass.